In March 2011, the body of 25-year-old Hayley Brooks was discovered in Suite 212 of Serenity Blue Resort in Fiji. The investigation that followed uncovered a web of secrets, debt, and betrayal. Just days earlier, in late February 2011, Hayley had arrived at the luxury island retreat with her boyfriend, Jason Carter, for what was supposed to be a dream getaway. But behind the picture-perfect setting, a deadly chain of events had already begun. One that would turn a romantic escape into one of the most chilling murders in Fiji's history. The morning of March 6, 2011, should have been like any other at Serenity Blue Resort, a paradise where honeymooners and tourists basked in the golden sunrise over Fiji's crystal-clear waters. The resort, nestled on a secluded private island, was known for its tranquility, the kind of place where worries melted away under the tropical sun. But that morning, something was different. At 6 a.m., a front desk receptionist, Lena Tavita, answered a call from a guest in Suite 214, reporting loud bangs, muffled shouting, and what sounded like breaking glass from the neighboring room, Suite 212. The complaint had come in late the previous night, sometime around 11:30 p.m., but the staff had brushed it off, assuming it was just another drunken argument between lovers. It wasn't uncommon. Couples came to Serenity Blue Resort expecting magic, but sometimes the isolation and the weight of unspoken truths cracked the illusion. By 8:30 a.m., when the housekeeping team began their rounds, the front desk sent a supervisor to check on the room. At first, the knocks were polite, just a light tapping against the wooden door. No response. A second attempt, this time firmer, still nothing. The supervisor hesitated. The resort had strict policies about guest privacy, but something about the silence behind the door felt wrong. She tried the handle, locked. The room had been booked for another 2 nights, so there was no reason for it to be empty. After a quick conversation with management, she used her master key, pushing the door open just enough to peek inside. The smell hit her first. Not the usual scent of tropical flowers and ocean air that filled every room in the resort, but something heavier, metallic, thick. Then she saw the floor. Blood. At first, it was just a smear near the door, as if someone had tried to wipe it away, but as she stepped further inside, she saw more. A deep, dark stain soaked into the cream-colored carpet near the foot of the bed. Then her eyes traveled upward, and that's when she saw the body. Hayley Brooks lay sprawled on the floor, her blonde hair caked in dried blood. Her face was swollen, her arms covered in deep bruises. Her hands, still curled slightly as if she had fought until the very end, were scratched and bloodied. The overhead light cast a dull glow over her lifeless body, highlighting the shattered glass scattered around her. The supervisor stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. Her fingers fumbled for the hotel phone mounted on the wall. She barely registered her own voice as she relayed what she saw to the emergency operator. By 9 a.m., the Fiji police force had arrived. Officers moved quickly, ushering staff and onlookers away from the suite. The resort, usually alive with the sounds of clinking glasses and soft laughter, was now eerily silent. A crime scene had replaced paradise. Detective Malachi Vosa arrived minutes later. The moment he stepped inside the room, he knew this was no ordinary case. The sheer violence of the scene told him that much. This wasn't a simple break-in gone wrong. This wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted Hayley Brooks dead, and they had made sure of it. As forensic teams began their work photographing every inch of the blood-stained suite, one question stood out among all others. Where was Jason Carter? Hayley Brooks had always seemed unstoppable. From the moment she was old enough to stand on her own 2 feet, she was already in motion, jumping, flipping, and chasing dreams that were too big for most people to understand. By the time she was 6, she had already joined her first cheerleading squad, standing out even among the older girls with her natural energy and confidence. At 14 years old, she became the youngest member of her high school's varsity cheer team, leading them to regional championships. At 17, she was the face of a team that took home the national title. She didn't just perform, she commanded attention. People said she had a kind of light around her, something magnetic, and she never let anything dim it, not even the struggles waiting for her at home. Dallas, Texas was home, but it had never been easy. The house where she grew up was small, old, and filled with echoes of things she didn't like to remember. Her mother, Linda Brooks, did everything she could to keep food on the table, working long hours at a diner and taking cleaning jobs at night. Haley barely saw her except in passing, quick kisses on the forehead before school, tired smiles exchanged in the early morning hours when her mother came home after another shift. Her father was a different story. Robert Brooks had been a problem for as long as she could remember. A man who drank more than he spoke, whose presence in the house was unpredictable. Sometimes he would disappear for days, and when he came back, the air in the house felt different, tense, waiting for something to break. And it always did. The worst nights were the ones when he came home angry, the yelling, the crashing of furniture, the way her mother tried to shield her while pretending nothing was happening. By 12 years old, Haley had learned how to block out the sounds. She played music in her room, practiced new tumbling moves in the backyard, anything to drown out the storm inside the house. But one night, something changed. She woke up to silence, the kind that felt too heavy. Then she heard the front door slam. When she walked into the living room, she saw her mother standing alone, shaking, with blood on her lip. Her father never came back. For most people, that kind of childhood left scars, the kind that never really faded, but Haley refused to let it define her. She used cheerleading as an escape, throwing herself into training, practicing routines for hours just to feel something other than the weight of her past. She told herself she would never let anyone treat her the way her father had treated her mother. She would never allow herself to be trapped in fear. So, when she met Jason Carter at 27 years old, she thought she had finally found something different. At first, he was everything she thought she deserved. Charming, ambitious, a man with presence, the kind who turned heads when he walked into a room. He told stories about his days as a college athlete, how he had played football before a knee injury forced him to quit. He had been part of the crowd Haley always admired, the driven, confident people who seemed like they were meant for more. And he made her feel like she was part of it. By 2010, Jason had built a name for himself in Miami's nightclub scene. He co-owned the Carter Room, a place known for its VIP clientele, wild parties, and exclusive events. He had money, power, and a way of making Haley feel like she was the only person who mattered. But there were cracks beneath the surface. At first, they were small. The way he got irritated when she spent too much time with her friends. The way he clenched his jaw when another man talked to her. The way his grip on her wrist was sometimes just a little too tight. Haley ignored it. Love required compromise, she told herself, and Jason had been through a lot. His father had left him when he was young too, and he was just afraid of losing the people he cared about. Her friends weren't convinced. Danielle Foster, her best friend since high school, had seen the signs before. She told Haley she didn't trust him, that something felt off. Then there were the stories, whispers about Jason's temper. 2 arrests for assault, though both cases had been dropped. A former girlfriend who had vanished from the nightlife scene overnight, moving out of the city without telling anyone why. Haley didn't believe any of it. Not because she was blind, but because she didn't want to be. She had spent her whole life running from the idea that love had to hurt. She wasn't about to admit that she might have ended up in the same kind of situation her mother had. By early 2011, things between them had settled into a rhythm. Jason had big plans, expanding his business, turning the Carter room into a chain. Hayley had her own dreams, coaching young girls, preparing them for the same championships she had won years ago. And Jason had an idea, something exciting, something romantic. A pre-marriage getaway, something he called their honeymoon, a trip to Fiji, a way to see if they were really meant for forever. Hayley was thrilled. She'd never been to Fiji before, never seen the kind of paradise Jason described. White sand beaches, crystal clear water, private resorts where it was just the two of them. It sounded like a dream. So in February 2011, she packed her bags. She told her friends she would be gone for 2 weeks, promised to bring back stories and souvenirs. She never made it home. By March 6, 2011, Hayley Brooks wasn't a cheerleading coach anymore. She wasn't the star of any team. She wasn't the girl who inspired others with her energy and drive. She was just another crime scene. The resort's security footage provided a chilling timeline of events on March 5, 2011, the night before Hayley Brooks was found dead. The day had started like any other at Serenity Blue Resort. Sunbathers stretched along the shore, newlyweds toasted to their futures, and the sound of waves crashing against the sand mixed with the soft hum of island music. But beneath the surface of paradise, something dark was brewing. At 10:45 p.m., the cameras captured Hayley Brooks and Jason Carter returning to their suite. Even in grainy black and white footage, the tension between them was obvious. Hayley walked ahead, her posture stiff, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Jason followed a few steps behind, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked over his shoulder twice before entering Suite 212, as if making sure no one was watching. It was the last time anyone saw Hayley alive. At 11:15 p.m., guests in neighboring rooms heard a scream, not the kind that came from playful arguments or drunken fun, but something raw, filled with terror. It was followed by the sound of shattering glass, then heavy thuds, as if furniture had been knocked over. Some guests later admitted they paused for a moment, listening, wondering if they should call the front desk. But the resort was known for its privacy, and people hesitated to interfere in what might have been a lover's quarrel. At 11:30 p.m., the balcony door of Suite 212 slid open. A single silhouette emerged. The security camera near the pool, positioned at a distance, captured a figure stepping onto the wooden deck, pausing for just a few seconds before making its way down the stairs leading to the beach. The footage was too dark to make out any clear features. The shape appeared broad-shouldered, moving with hurried but controlled steps. And then, by midnight, everything went silent. Inside the room, the violence had stopped. The screaming had ended. There were no more sounds of struggle, no more movement. Whatever had happened in Suite 212, it was over. For hours, the resort remained peaceful. Couples drank at the bar, staff cleaned up after the evening festivities, and no one suspected that just a few doors away, a woman's body lay lifeless. But who had left that night? Was it Jason Carter? If so, why did he walk away from the scene of a brutal murder? If not, then who else had been inside that room? These questions hung over the investigation like a dark cloud, but before detectives could find their answers, something even more disturbing happened. At 8:30 a.m. on March 6, 2011, just as police were beginning to collect forensic evidence from the crime scene, a second body was discovered. The call came from a group of resort guests who had set out early for a morning hike along Coral Ridge Trail, a secluded path known for its breathtaking views of the ocean. The path cut through dense greenery leading to a cliffside that overlooked the beach. The guests had been taking photos when one of them noticed something unusual, a man lying in the brush just a few feet off the trail. He wasn't moving. When the guests stepped closer, they saw blood. The victim was identified as Ethan Delgado, a 35-year-old architect from Los Angeles who had arrived at the resort 2 days earlier. He had been staying just 4 doors down from Suite 212, and his room had a clear view of the hallway leading to Haley and Jason's suite. The cause of death was obvious, a single gunshot wound to the head. Detectives rushed to piece together what had happened. Ethan Delgado had been one of the few people who reported seeing someone leaving Haley's room around 11:30 p.m. the previous night. He had mentioned it casually to a staff member early that morning, saying that something didn't seem right. He hadn't been alarmed at first, just observant. Now, he was dead. The timing of his murder wasn't a coincidence. Someone had silenced him. The realization sent shockwaves through the investigation. This was no longer just a case of domestic violence turned deadly. It was something bigger, more deliberate, more controlled. Someone had killed Haley. Someone had left the room unseen. And now, someone had hunted down the only known witness before he could talk. The question was no longer just who killed Haley Brooks. It was who was trying to cover it up. By March 7th, 2011, the investigation into Haley Brooks's murder had already taken a dark and complicated turn. At first, detectives had assumed it was a case of domestic violence, a brutal fight between a couple that had spiraled out of control. But as Detective Malachi Vosa and his team dug deeper, the pieces of the puzzle no longer fit together so easily. Something wasn't right. The crime scene itself had raised immediate questions. The level of violence suggested pure rage, but there were signs that made it seem calculated. The bed was undisturbed, as if no one had been sleeping when the attack happened. The minibar had been overturned, but the bottles were still in place, suggesting it wasn't knocked over in a blind fury, but rather staged to look like a struggle. The blood patterns on the floor didn't quite match up with where Haley's body had fallen, as if she had been moved after she was killed. And then there was the glass, shards from the coffee table and the balcony door, but none on Haley's skin, meaning the glass had broken before she was thrown to the ground. This was not the chaotic aftermath of a heated argument. It was something far colder. And then there was Jason Carter's disappearance. By the time authorities arrived at the scene on March 6, 2011, Jason was nowhere to be found. His passport, wallet, and a duffel bag were missing from the suite. The resort's security footage showed him leaving through a side entrance just after midnight, his face partially obscured by the shadows. At first, it seemed like the actions of a guilty man, a killer fleeing the scene. But when detectives traced his movements, they found something strange. Instead of heading straight to the airport or disappearing into the city, Jason had made a series of erratic stops. First, he withdrew cash from an ATM in downtown Nadi at 12:45 a.m., pulling out the equivalent of $8,000 in Fijian dollars. Then he was caught on surveillance footage at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, where he stayed for less than an hour before leaving again. By 4:30 a.m., he was seen boarding a ferry to a smaller island nearby, not exactly the move of someone who had planned his escape. It wasn't until March 8, 2011, that detectives uncovered the truth about Jason Carter's financial troubles. He wasn't just a nightclub owner. He was a desperate man drowning in debt. Through interviews and background checks, they learned that Jason had developed a serious gambling addiction over the past 3 years. It had started small, high-stakes poker games in Miami, friendly bets that escalated into 6-figure losses. But by late 2010, his debts had spiraled out of control. He owed over $200,000 to a man named Dmitry Koval, a known loan shark with ties to organized crime. But Jason had made a fatal mistake. He hadn't just borrowed money from a dangerous man, he had borrowed money without the ability to pay it back. That was where Luka Petrovich came in. Luka Petrovich was not the kind of man people spoke about openly. A Serbian national with a violent past, he had been in and out of prison for assault, extortion, and suspected murder, though none of the charges had ever stuck. He had worked for Dmitry Koval for years, specializing in collecting debts from people who thought they could outsmart the system. And now Luka Petrovich had been in Fiji at the exact same time as Jason Carter and Haley Brooks. Flight records showed that Luka arrived in Fiji on March 3rd, 2011, just 2 days before Haley was murdered. He had used an alias, checking into a different resort under the name Igor Markovich. He had no luggage, no return ticket, and no reason to be there, except one. He was there for Jason. The evidence against Jason was damning, but something didn't sit right. If he had killed Haley in a fit of rage, why did it look so calculated? And if he had simply been trying to escape, why was he hiding instead of running? Then, forensic analysis revealed something even more chilling. Detectives had originally assumed Haley had been attacked by one person, but the blood spatter patterns and the bruising on her body suggested otherwise. There were 2 different attack patterns, one from someone who had struck her with bare fists, the other from someone who had used an object, possibly a weapon. There had been 2 attackers in that room, and suddenly, everything changed. Jason Carter may not have been the man who delivered the final blow, but he had been there. He had been part of it. And now he was running, not just from the police, but from something far worse. Haley Brooks's murder wasn't just a crime of passion, it was a setup. By March 12, 2011, Detective Malachi Vosa believed he was finally getting closer to the truth. The case had already taken too many twists. What had first seemed like a crime of passion had unraveled into something far more sinister. And now, the final piece of evidence had surfaced. Officer Kaleo Messina, his partner, had been the one to find it. The forensic team had combed through Suite 212 multiple times, collecting fingerprints, blood samples, and fibers. But in a case like this, the smallest detail could change everything. And that was exactly what happened. Tucked beneath Haley Brooks's lifeless body, hidden in the folds of the blood-stained carpet, was a casino chip. It was small, circular, and coated in a faint smear of red. At first, it seemed out of place. Haley had never been to any of the nearby casinos, but Jason Carter had, and more importantly, so had Luka Petrovich. By March 13, 2011, Officer Messina had tracked the chip back to Azure Palace, a high-end underground casino just outside of Nadi. It wasn't just a gambling spot, it was a place where debts were made and, more importantly, where they were collected. Jason had spent hours there on March 3, 2011, just 2 days before Haley was murdered. Surveillance footage confirmed it. He wasn't alone. Sitting across from him at the poker table, expression unreadable, was Luka Petrovich. That was the moment the investigation shifted. The loan shark's enforcer had been in Fiji. He had met with Jason, and now a casino chip from that very place had been found beneath Haley's body. There was no way this was a coincidence. Officer Messina knew this was the kind of evidence that tied everything together. He told Vosa he was going to file his report the next morning, but he never got the chance. At 5:45 a.m. on March 14, 2011, his body was found at the base of a 60-foot cliff near the resort. His patrol car was still parked near the trail entrance, the door slightly ajar. His radio had been left on. His report, the one he had worked so hard to put together, was missing. Someone had silenced him. By March 20th, 2011, Jason Carter was finally caught. He had spent 2 weeks evading authorities, using fake identities and bribes to move from country to country. His plan had been to disappear, to escape to a place where no one would ever find him. But just as he was about to board a flight to Bangkok, authorities in Hong Kong International Airport arrested him. His trial in 2012 revealed the truth. Hayley Brooks had been murdered by Luka Petrovich, acting on orders from Jason's loan shark. It had never been about rage or jealousy. It had been a message, a punishment for Jason's debts. Jason had been there, watching as the woman he claimed to love was beaten to death, and he had done nothing to stop it. That made him an accomplice. For his role in the crime, Jason was sentenced to 35 years in prison. But Luka Petrovich? He vanished. Some believed he had escaped the country long before police even realized who he was. Others whispered that he had been killed to protect the people who had hired him. For Hayley's family, there was no justice that could undo what had happened. The honeymoon she had dreamed of had turned into one of the most chilling murders in Fiji's history. And in the end, the person she trusted most had played a part in her death. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss our daily updates, including the insane case of the dead wife discovered in the morning in back garden hot tub after crazy party with other couple. Be sure to check it out and share your thoughts in the comments.